So good evening, everyone. We are at the Vancouver IONS Community Group, a wholly independent group serving members and friends of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, better known as IONS. IONS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on consciousness, human potential, and personal and social transformation. The mission of IONS is to reveal the interconnected nature of reality through scientific exploration and personal discovery, creating a more compassionate, thriving, and sustainable world. We're very happy to have as our speaker tonight, Helané Wahbeh, ND MCR, who is the Director of Research at IONS. She's also an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Neurology at Oregon Health and Science University. She has an undergraduate degree from the University of California, Berkeley in anthropology and pre-medicine, a clinical doctorate from the National University of Natural Medicine, and a Master of Clinical Research from Oregon Health and Science University, where she's been on the faculty in the Department of Neurology since 2006. She has also completed 2 postdoctoral research fellowships and authored many research papers. Wow. Her current research interests include healing stress and trauma, mechanisms of mind-body medicine, complementary and alternative medicines, and the frontiers of human capacity. She has extensive training in and personal practice of meditation for over 19 years. Her book, The Science of Channeling: Why You Should Trust Your Intuition and the Force That Connects Us All, seeks to bring together scientific research on the subject as well as its practical application. Tonight, she will share her personal journey and update us on all the important research being done by IONS scientists. I hope she will also talk about her recent IONS program with Dr. Powell on the Telepathy Tapes, a new documentary on the telepathic abilities and experiences of non-speaking autistic people, which is scheduled to include interviews with IONS research scientists. Dr. Wahbeh, thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, and what a pleasure and honor it is for me to be here with you. I just want to presence the people from Portland and near Portland. I lived in Portland for 17 years. It is very near and dear to my heart, and you heard from my bio, my time at Oregon OHSU. So all you Portlanders out there, that's wonderful to feel that connection. And so when I engage in communicating about ions, it always feels like I'm trying to take what's coming out of an open fire hydrant and distill it into digestible, impactful, understandable chunks. So I'm going to attempt to do that with us today. And there are a few kind of major themes that I want to make sure that I talk about. One is, where is IONS research today? And what are we actually working on? The second was, Donnie asked me to really share my personal journey and how I ended up to be where I am today. And I think very intrinsic to that is the IONS Channeling Research Program and the channeling research projects that I'm working on right now. And then the third theme is around the telepathy tapes, which have really just exploded and have taken the world by storm. And I'm really excited about ION's potential role with Kai Dickens and her team. And I'm excited to share with you about what we're doing with them and what we know about telepathy. And then I'm imagining that we're going to have plenty of time for questions and a dialogue after that, because I would love to hear from all of you. Now, I had told Dottie that, you could ask questions as we go along. If there's something that's not clear to you or you want clarification, that would be great for you to ask as we go along. And we'll just see how it unfolds. Does that sound good with everybody? Okay, great. So, Dottie mentioned IONS, and our mission. Along with our mission is also our guiding premise or our guiding hypothesis, which is that everything is interconnected, and that embodying that awareness allows us to access information and energy from beyond time and space. And when we do that, in turn, it can profoundly impact and create transformation, innovation, and well-being. And so it really is this premise of three factors: this inner sense of interconnectedness, our extended human capacities, or our human potential that goes beyond our traditional five senses, and that how that affects our well-being and our quality of life. And so the IONS science team has been focusing on that guiding premise for the last about 7 years now with our current strategic plan. And we currently are working on 18 active projects that somehow fit in with some aspect of that guiding premise. So our current strategic plan has 5 pillars, and the science team is responsible for 2 of them. The first one is called the IONS Discovery Lab, and it is the largest study of its kind, looking at transformative practices and how those transformative practices shift the 3 aspects of our guiding premise, right? The interconnectedness, the extended human capacities, and the well-being. So the IONS Discovery Lab basically collects measures on those 3 factors before and after any type of transformative practice, whether it's meditation or shamanic drumming or hypnosis or psychedelics. And we've been engaging with people for over 5 years now, inviting workshop leaders to participate with us in this large study. And for every workshop leader who partners with us to collect these data points from their participants, they get a report that shows them, well, how did people actually shift from my workshop? So the IONS Discovery Lab is doing a service for the workshop leader while that data goes into our larger study. Now, the larger study has 3 main research questions. What is the relationship between those 3 factors, the interconnectedness, the extended human capacity, and the well-being? And so that's research question number 1. Research question 2 is, what transformative practices actually move the needle on those 3 factors more than others? Is it meditation? Is it nature-based? Is it something else? That's research question 2. And research question 3 is there anything about the individual people? Do they have specific characteristics that make them perhaps do better with a meditation workshop than some different type of workshop? So those 3 main research questions are the larger IONS Discovery Lab study questions. Now, we have a collaboration with Harvard. Many of you may have heard of Satguru. He's actually doing a consecration event at the beginning of May. And we are partnering with Harvard through the IONS Discovery Lab to collect measures from the participants of this consecration event. There are over 5,000 people registered for this event. So this is happening at the beginning of May. And we're really excited about that because it is taking us, that event will take us over our pre-registered participant numbers for the main IONS Discovery Lab study. Well, what does that mean? So there is a huge push now in rigorous research that we always pre-register our studies. That means that we lay out exactly what the study design is, exactly what our research questions are, how we're going to analyze it, etc. So we pre-registered this IONS Discovery Lab study, and we said we're going to reach these specific numbers, and then we're going to close the study and do the analysis. So this Satguru event that's happening in May is a pivotal moment for this larger IONS Discovery Lab study. Another study with the IONS Discovery Lab is focused on using citizen science to look at different ways that meditation can support people. So we use this Muse EEG device, and people wear this device on their head. I'll put a funny thing on here. And it collects brain waves, and it collects it through a surrogate marker heart waves called photoplethysmography, PPG. We can actually get heart rate and heart rate variability from this device. So people wear this device, and then we measure them before and after they do, thanks Ron, before and after they do a month of daily meditation practice. And we're looking at 5 different meditation practice types. And for this study, we are recruiting 2,000 people. So as far as I know, this is the largest study of its kind to tease apart different meditation types and how they affect us. So that's the pillar 1, the IONS Discovery Lab, and where we're at there. I'll just pause there and see if anybody has questions about the IONS Discovery Lab. Also say that the survey is available in 6 different languages, and we've made a lot of effort to recruit workshop leaders from around the world.
Are you recruiting individuals for this program, or just group leaders?
Group leaders.
Oh, okay.
Although we do have partners that are, say, therapists who work with people one-on-one, but we would be partnering with the therapist to recruit all of their clients. Okay, great. So I forgot to say, so, we are working on 18 active projects, and that our science team collectively has published 388 peer-reviewed journal articles to date. And a peer-reviewed journal article is kind of like the gold standard for establishing rigor. So that really is our kind of main outcome that we're always trying to produce, if you will, to get our research out into the world. And then our wonderful marketing communications team takes those peer-reviewed journal articles and turns them into blogs, or turns them into, information that lay people can understand, because sometimes they can be quite technical, especially Dean's papers, and gets that work out into the world. I see there might be a question here.
She asked the 5 different types of meditation.
Yes. So so the consecration event is basically where Satguru is going to be blessing a specific area. And so that's more of a passive kind of energetic consecration event. The meditation study is a different study. And so those 5 types are mindfulness, mantra meditation, non-dual meditation. There's one more. Oh, loving kindness, metta meditation. And then we actually have classical music as a practice as well, listening to practical music. Okay, great. So that's pillar 1, the IONS Discovery Lab. Then we have pillar 2, which is called IONS X, which is all about how consciousness affects the physical world. How my intention can actually affect my body, affect someone else, affect a physical object. And in thinking IONS X, we have a model called the ATOM, ATOM model, where the O is the operator. So I'm the operator. I'm directing my positive healing intentions, say, to my son, who is the target which is the T, right? So we have the operator O, the target's the T, and the target can be a photon or a laser or a cell in a petri dish. A target can be anything, but me as the operator, I'm directing my positive intention to that target. And then, is there anything about that relationship, which is the M, any moderators of that relationship that influences how my intention affects the physical world? Does it matter if I'm here north of Seattle versus sitting on a vortex in Sedona? Does it matter if it's a new moon or a full moon? What are all the kind of nuances that can potentially affect that relationship? That's the M. And then the A is about analysis. Is there any kind of statistical or other ways that we can look at that data that helps us understand it a little bit more clearly? So we have numerous IONS X projects that are teasing apart the different aspects of that atom model. For example, there is a big study that is being done in collaboration with MD Anderson Cancer Center, and Arno Delorme, one of our scientists, is a brainwave EEG wizard. He's a neuroscientist, and he's been working with them to analyze healer brainwaves, Healy brainwaves, healer brainwaves, cell electrical activity, and mouse electrical activity, because the healer actually directed his intention to cells in a lab and to mice. And so they put out a paper about the human cell data, and they're now finishing up a paper with the human mouse data, which is the first of its kind, which is really quite incredible. So again, in that case, we had the healer, who was the operator, we had the cells that were the target, and we had the mice that were the target. We have another project where we're, let's see here, there's a question. Yes, Ron, there is a link to the GCP project, because they are also collaborating to have some of their devices at the consecration event, and we'll be collecting that QNG data as well, which will be really cool to see what's happening in the environment. That's a great question. We're actually collecting a lot of measures for that consecration event. What are some other IONS X projects? So there's 2 telepathy type projects we're doing. One is gut brain telepathy. So there's pairs of people, emotionally bonded pairs, that are coming into the lab, and they're separated. And one of them has electrical devices put on their stomach. So they're actually collecting the electrical output of the digestive system, okay? And then the person in the other room is getting various stimuli alternating with a control period that would stimulate their digestive system. And so does the person in the other side of the building, does their stomach actually respond when their bonded person on the other side of the building is experiencing something? That's what we're going to find out. We've actually finished we finished data collection, and Dean is now analyzing the data for that. So we should have the results of that study really soon. It's not really telepathy, because it's not mind to mind. It's called telesomatic experiences. That's when you can feel something in your body that's connected to somebody else. We're also part of an international collaboration on something called the Gonsfeld protocol. And so, early in parapsychology, there was this idea that, psychic impressions come in and the brain acts as a filter. And perhaps if we reduced the amount of sensory input coming in from our five senses, it would be easier to receive psychic impressions. So the Gonsfeld protocol includes red light that comes in through like ping pong balls over the eyes, and then people wear headphones with pink noise coming in. They're laying down in a very relaxed state. They go through a relaxation induction. And then traditionally, a researcher might direct a mental impression to them, and then they are just speaking out loud what comes to them. And this Gonsfeld protocol has some of the strongest results, strongest evidence in all of parapsychology. It has been replicated in numerous labs around the world with thousands of participants. And this current international study includes 7 labs, and the goal is to get enough participants so we can have kind of a more definitive study looking at this. So that study is now recruiting skeptics, and we're having a really hard time finding skeptics because we are recruiting, each lab has to do 20 believers and 20 skeptics to go through this Gonsfeld protocol. And not only do you have to not be a meditator or practice yoga, you have to not have had a psi experience and not believe that you would do well on a psi task. So we're just having a lot of trouble finding people in the Bay Area who fit that criteria. If you knew anybody, please send them our way. We just started advertising on Facebook, which brought in a few people, which we got really excited about. So we're trying to bring those people in and have them bring their friends in and see how it goes. Ron mentioned the GCP project. GCP, which stands for the Global Consciousness Project, was version 1.0, was hosted by IONS as the administrative supporter, and Roger Nelson at the Paralab created that, and that collected data for over 20 years. It's actually still collecting data. But what's happening now is that HeartMath has taken over for Global Conscious Project 2.0, and IONS is still involved in a consulting role. And that's basically these random number generator devices that are in a network all around the world. And it's meant to see if collective consciousness affects these physical devices. And going back to the atom model, these random number generator devices are the targets. And in terms of the operator, it's not a specific person who is intentionally directing their intention. It's an indirect effect from all people. And so GCP 1.0 found incredibly statistically significant results that in moments of intense emotion, whether it was positive or negative, did show shifts in the data from these random number generators. Does everyone know what those devices are, or do I need to explain what those devices are?
Why don't you explain those, how they work, please?
So when, parapsychologists first began looking at how intention affects the physical world, they were thinking about, well, how do we do that? And they started first with dice rolls. Could I get 2 6s to come up? Then they did coin tosses. heads or tails, heads or tails. And, you can have loaded dice, you can have, issues with the coins, because what if you don't use the same pressure when you flip it or whatever? And so they ended up using radioactive isotopes. And so, that decay of a radioactive material happens in a completely random way. And so the decay should happen randomly. So if someone's directing their intention at it, that in a materialist paradigm, that shouldn't change how the decay is happening. But they found that it did. But, dealing with radioactive materials is not very easy, right? So they had to think about how to do that better. So they ended up using random number generators. And I think the simplest way to think about it is that this random number generator is spitting out zeros and ones totally randomly. So each time you have an equal probability of getting a 1 versus getting a 0. And then you just end up with these streams of data of zeros and ones. So if you take that data for, let's say, a 5-hour period, you should have a 50% zeros and 50% ones. And there's really no reason for it to deviate from that. And so with these psychokinesis or intention experiments, what we see is that it's not split 50-50. There's actually, a greater shift to ones or a greater shift to zeros. So, there's been a lot of improvements to these little devices, and GCP 2.0 is using a more sophisticated data type. But these devices are essentially placed in various people's homes around the world. And GCP 2.0 is actually looking for more hosts. So if that's something you're interested in participating in, you can actually go to their website and become a host to one of these devices. And they're going to keep collecting this data and look at the relationship between the state of the emotion of the planet and how it relates to these random data streams. Pause there, no questions. I'm going to talk about a few more of the IONS X projects that I think you're really going to get excited about. One is the Spontaneous Healing Bibliography, which is a legacy project that was created. As a host, would you not influence the randomness? Yeah, that's a great question. And they're doing some pilots on that to see if your family, your teenage kids slamming doors and yelling at you, is going to affect the device. So they're actually looking at that, which is, I think, a really interesting question. And the hope is that there may be local effects, but that you'd see non-local effects as well, that they might both be there, but how do you tease it apart in the analysis? So the Spontaneous Healing Bibliography was first published as a big, thick manual, and it basically collected published case studies of people who had a spontaneous remission from various types of cancer. And so that was updated about 15 years ago, and we are now currently updating it to present time. And with the amazing tool of AI, we're going to be able to get it onto a searchable website pretty easily, so that it will be available to clinicians and also lay people who want to be inspired and get, feel source of comfort from these many, many, many hundreds of cases of people having spontaneous remission from various cancers. So that's an exciting project. And then we have another project using virtual reality, and this is also in our laboratory. It's using virtual reality as a tool to see if the body can sense the future. And the person has the VR goggles on, and these specific goggles collect like 5 different physiological measures: heart rate, brain waves, skin conductance. I think it also does pupil dilation. And sorry, I'm seeing the chat, so I got a little distracted. I'm going to set that aside. Maybe someone can tell me if I should pay attention to that.
Why don't I suggest that if you have a question, you just push the little question, hand raise question, and then it'll sit up there until Helané can answer it. And then we'll have the question in the recording.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion, Dottie. So the person wears the VR goggles and they're watching the screen, and it's actually a driving game. So they're, driving on the road, and a car passes going, the opposite direction in the next lane. And so the car either passes by or it crashes into you. And so it's essentially a passive game because the person doesn't necessarily need to do anything. But what we're looking at is if the body knows before the crash. Is there a signal in the body before the crash happens? And so there's 2 types of knowing the future. There's precognition, which is knowing in the mind. So you can have a precognitive dream, you can get an impression of something, you can get an intuitive hit of something that's known with the mind. But then there's also something called presentiment, which is knowing in the body. And I think those experiments are incredibly compelling because the ego's not involved. The body's just knowing the future physiologically without the mind even being aware of it, which I think is quite incredible. And then the last IONS X project I want to talk to you about is what we call mind to mind. And it goes back to this idea of emotionally bonded pairs having a connection that goes beyond our 3D world, right? I'm doing the dishes and I get this, strong feeling, call mom, and I call mom and she's like, I just got in a car accident, or, like this knowingness of people that we're connected to. And that shows up for people in so many different ways. And there's thousands of anecdotes about this experience. So one of the greatest challenges that IONS and others have found in doing this work is finding the pairs of people that we can bring into the lab to be able to study this phenomenon. And so we are engaged in a study to find 100 pairs of emotionally bonded people who we vet. They have to jump through many different hoops, and then they do a telepathy experiment, and they have to jump through all those hoops, make it through all those hoops, and perform really well on that telepathy experiment. And then we include them in our 100 people. When this study's done and we have our 100 pairs, then we will move to the next phase, which is doing EEG and neuroimaging on those pairs of people in the laboratory. So right now, this recruitment of the 100 pairs is all done online, and we're recruiting people from all over the place. So this is something that you could actually participate in yourselves if you are interested in it and you have had these experiences and you feel like, oh yeah, this happens a lot with, so-and-so, and they're interested, you could be part of that study, and we're still looking for people. So if yourself or someone has experienced that quite a bit, then we'd love to have you help us out with that study. So I'm going to pause there. Those are our kind of highlights of many of our IONS X projects. Any comments or questions about those? Janine.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, you mentioned AI, and since I've had experiences where I knew that it was very off because of there was a set of tests that had been done over 3 years, and then they upgraded their stats to correlate with AI. So I'm wondering what you folks are doing to be confident in the results you're getting. Is there something you can say on that?
Yes. So we always have a human double check. So we don't just have it do its thing and take it at face value.
Mhm.
And for that specific project I was talking about, AI is incredible at um, handling data and manipulating it in specific ways. So we aren't necessarily using it to create content. We're not having it create content. We're saying, hey, take these 1,000 records and organize them in this way.
Mhm.
Take this and create a website. So it's more operational, if that makes sense. So there's less error because you aren't saying, hey, what is the meaning of life? Or, I mean, that's an extreme example, but I hope you get the point I'm trying to make.
I
Yeah.
do. I appreciate that because I think that we don't want to just automatically assume because it's AI, it's right. And so it sounds like you're doing great work with that.
Wholeheartedly agree. It's an incredible, incredible tool. And like with any tool, it's success has to do with how you use the tool, and to know what it's capable of and what its limits are and what it's good at and what it's not so good at.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm. And we're always nice. We always say please and we always say thank you.
Nice.
I think Milt
Yeah,
had his hand up first and then, yeah.
yeah. Thank you very much. I would like to, kind of how I got started in all this work about 30 years ago was an article by Willis Harman on the consciousness of all life, and that never has left me. I mean, it's been a guiding. So thank you, and also Edgar Mitchell's work has been very influential. And I would like to pick up on the brief comment you made about AI. I'm not a big AI person, but I was given this book, Genesis. I don't know if you've read it or not. And I was absolutely intrigued with the explanation of AI, of how it's a learning process. And this learning gets put into stories, if you will. And these stories are connected relationally to produce the intelligence. And I'm going, that's exactly parallel to the way I have observed wisdom being developed in other cultures and in our own. Um, and so it was very, I mean, it just was made sense to me that the Chinese would come up with an AI for a fraction of the cost of what we came up with and much more accurate. Why? Because they're connected to nature. And the AI work in here is almost all anthropocentric. And so I'm wondering for you in the experiment that you were doing, and I'm sorry I don't remember all the terminology, but you said there were 5 ways of meditating. And I'm wondering if one of the 5 is a connection to nature. And if it's not, is there some way to do that? Because I have a feeling that those cultures that are connected to nature are going to come up with different, some oftentimes far better responses um, than those that would settle in by one of the other methods. I mean, all the methods are good, but I was interested. I mean, it was interesting for you to say one of them was classical music, and I'm going like the flute has exactly that kind of impact on me. I'm not indigenous, but I have a listening for them, and I don't try to represent them. I just insist on authentic messages from them, people who have lived it. And I think those people who have lived it, and particularly in a culture that speaks a language that is always about gratitude for life gifts. What brings life? Why does it thrive? Why does it flourish? And they know that, and they have the deepest gratitude for it. And they become different people. It's kind of like Robin Kimmerer writes about in her book, In Brady and Sweetgrass, that when you know the earth loves you, that these gifts are there and they're there for every life form, then you develop this sacred bond. And so I feel
That's
when I
lovely.
listen, a sacred bond. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm
for
sorry.
that, oh, sorry.
No,
Well, for
okay,
that
that's enough.
specific, for that specific meditation study with the 5 types, they're not specifically nature-based, but I will tell you that in our IONS Discovery Lab study, the pilot version, there were 2 components of the workshops that had the best improvements in sense of interconnectedness and well-being. And that was if meditation was included, and the other was if it was nature-based. So you might be interested in checking that paper out that we have on our website about that pilot project as a kind of source of evidence that, hey, that's actually true, that, you know, being in nature and having nature-based transformative practices really moves the needle for people's quality of life more than others.
Yeah.
So
What is the name of that paper?
it's called the IONS Discovery Lab, interconnectedness, well-being, and something in personal workshops. And where you'll find it is in on our publications page on our website. And if you have trouble finding it, just let me know and I'll send you the link.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you
Mhm.
so much.
You're welcome. I'm so sorry. Can you pronounce your name? Is it Jonet? Jonet. Yes.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, it is. The J and the Z are pronounced together. It makes a soft J. I had a comment concerning the knowing the future that you mentioned about. It has been fairly recently that I began to realize that before something happens, I get either an image or a feeling that it's going to happen. And it's become really obvious to me, like the last probably few months. And what I've learned is that when it's something that I don't want it to happen, like something's falling off of something, or I'm going to trip on, or whatever, what I learned is that if I get that message, all I need to do is say no and go on with everything, and it doesn't happen. It's just say no. Remember Nancy Reagan's just say no? And I think it works. It really works. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment because I haven't heard, I mean, I've never said it to anybody else, and I haven't anybody else that I've talked with that might happen. But it's so fun.
Yeah.
When I
So
don't say no,
just to
excuse me.
clarify, are they negative? Like you're seeing something
Yes,
negative
these
that
are like warnings
got
that
it.
something is going to happen that I wouldn't want to happen. Like, you know, tripping on something is like the best thing I'd come up with at the moment, or something falling off of something or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. And so far, that's what it is. Other things, as far as good things, I haven't even thought about that because, you know, I get messages. Ooh, that might work with dreams, though. Sometimes I have some very bad dreams, and the just say no. I mean, I do some lucid dreaming sometimes, and I'll even go back into the dream and change it, or I'll go back in and I'll have several different outcomes that could happen from it, or what I just do funny stuff like that.
It's
Johnny.
amazing. Go ahead.
So go ahead and thank you, Johnny. I was just gonna say,
Yeah. So I think that's really quite fascinating. And, there's some theories that, our extrasensory abilities are an evolutionary advantage, so if you envision that you're getting warnings about a potential future that might unfold that could harm you, I mean, it really does make sense, right? And then you say no, or you shift your behavior, and then you shift the probability of that future unfolding. And I always think it's funny when, people criticize psychics, and because they say, oh, well, what they told me didn't come true, but just from getting the information that they told you shifted the probability of that happening. So it's really quite interesting. Anyway.
Sometimes it's just it's a thought. I suddenly have a thought of something from out of nowhere.
Right.
And it's it's like somebody having an accident or something. And I immediately just say no.
Yeah. Yeah. So Janine, your hand is still up, but I'm assuming that was from before. Okay, great. Thank you. So I want to share about one more study with you, and before I dive into my personal story. We are collaborating with Stuart Hameroff right now. Maybe some of you know him. He was at the University of Arizona, and he worked with Sir Roger Penrose to develop the Hameroff-Penrose theory of consciousness, which is related to the microtubules in the brain. And I'm, know enough to be dangerous in terms of that theory, but it is, related to the quantum aspects of the microtubules. And so that led Stuart to think about, because the microtubules, for lack of a better word, vibrate at a specific frequency. And he thought that perhaps ultrasound may work to support the integrity of the microtubules in the brain, which could perhaps help people who have cognitive impairment or memory issues. And in fact, one of his colleagues has anecdotally seen thousands of cases where people use an ultrasound device that's supposed to be for like tennis elbow or something, and they actually use it at their temple, and that they have improvements in memory. So we are right now developing a study to be able to evaluate that formally, and to see if we can see any changes in people who have cognitive impairment, people with Alzheimer's disease, if we can see any changes in their cognitive function from the use of this ultrasound device. So this is being reviewed by our ethics board on Monday, and we're really excited about that and are looking for funding to be able to support that work. But we're really excited about the potential of that project. So stay tuned for that one. So any questions about the pillars and those projects that I highlighted before I jump into my personal journey and how I ended up at IONS? Nope. Okay, great. So as you know, I was working at OHSU. I was in the Department of Neurology. I was trained as a naturopathic physician, and I was in private practice for a while. And I had done research before I went to medical school, and it, in working with patients, it was great and wonderful, but I kept feeling pulled back to go back into research. And when I went to naturopathic medical school, they actually didn't even have a research department. But since I had graduated, they developed one. So I went back to my alma mater and said, I want to volunteer. I want to, do research. And then ended up doing a postdoctoral research fellowship there on mind-body medicine. And then ended up at OHSU doing another postdoctoral research fellowship, again, in mind-body medicine, complementary and alternative medicine, but specifically mind-body medicine and received a grant from the National Institute of Health to look at mindfulness meditation and how it works. And that was the study that I did with the combat veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I got an incredible training, incredible experience working there, and really so appreciative of that education that I received doing that work. And yet something felt a little bit missing, because when I would do the interviews with the combat veterans and I would hear about their stories, I had my own personal intuition that would pick up on things that was happening in the room, but I couldn't talk about that in my lab meeting. And so I was, a friend of mine contacted me and said, "Have you heard about IONS?" I said, "No." He said, "They're doing this expert focus group with meditation researchers called the Future of Meditation, and you really need to go to this." I said, "Sure, sounds great." So I ended up being able to travel to California and go to that event. And I was completely blown away by IONS and their courage to be able to ask these, in my mind, esoteric research questions that would never fly at an academic university. And why this was so exciting to me is because, you wouldn't know it from my training and my background, but I have had those experiences since I was a very young child. In fact, my whole family had these experiences, and that, I went to my first spiritualist type seance meeting when I was 10 years old at my grandparents' house. And in fact, my grandparents had these meetings on a weekly basis where we'd have, 40 people in a room, and my grandmother or my uncle would go into a trance state and they'd start speaking in these different voices, and they didn't charge any money for it. There was, I trusted them. There was no reason for them to fake it. And so what were these beings talking? Because it wasn't my grandma and it wasn't my uncle. So I grew up with these experiences and the understanding that we are more than our bodies, that we have a infinite soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, that survives beyond our physical death, that our human capacities go beyond our five senses, and that this was just kind of part of life. And how do we use that to support us to be more deep in trust, love, supporting others, supporting our family, supporting humanity. And that there really was a shift. There is now, we are in a shift of an awakening of humanity, and how could our awareness of that allow us to help others. So that was kind of the worldview that I was raised in. So that didn't really jive with OHSU. And I was in the closet about all that stuff, right? But then I got to IONS and they were talking about these things, and it completely blew me away. And I was like, I need to work here. So I, asked Cassie Veaton, who was the CEO at the time. I said, "Hey, do you have any space on your team? And, could I consult? What could that look like?" And that started the conversation. I ended up moving to California, joining the team as a consultant, and then as an employee scientist. And then I think it was 6 months, or not even that. I started in August, and I think it was in February that I was made director, maybe a year after. Anyway, I've been there 10 years now, and I'm just thrilled. I always say it's my dream job. It is my dream job. I'm so thrilled, so grateful to be leading the science team, and so grateful that I'm out of the closet and that I can, for the first time in my life, my professional and my personal are aligned, I remember, when I first started at IONS, I went to Chicago for the conference in July, and I was at one of the dinners or something, and someone said to me, so you realize this is going to completely ruin your academic career, right? And I looked at them and I said, you know what? That's okay. Because I just wasn't willing to be in hiding anymore. And yeah, so I'm so grateful. So when I got to IONS, I, was kind of getting the lay of the land. And, I was steeped in clinical health world and in academia. And I had no idea that parapsychology actually existed. And I was like, wait a minute, there's this whole field that's existed for 150 years. I was like this completely new, innocent person in that domain. And so I became very steeped in all the literature and felt like I was playing major catch up. But with my personal interest and experience of channeling, previous work that IONS had done, and of course, previous work in parapsychology, I felt like we needed not just random projects here and there, we needed a program. We needed a kind of larger program container that held this idea of channeling that was able to move forward important research questions. So that was kind of the birth of the IONS channeling research program, and it set out to answer a number of research questions. How common is channeling? What are its characteristics? Who can do it? How does it work? Can we learn anything from it? And can we verify the information? And so, I had to operationalize my definition of what channeling actually is. And so I chose to use a very broad definition, which is essentially that central factor of our guiding premise, this capacity, which I think all humans have, to access information and energy from beyond our conventional notions of time and space. Some people call it psychic, some people call it ESP. There's so many names ascribed to that very common human phenomenon. And that it really shows up on such a wide, diverse spectrum of experiences, from just general intuition or gut hunches on one side, all the way to trance channeling, which is what I described my uncle and grandmother did, and mental mediumship, and then everything in between. And yet all of those different expressions of channeling are reflective of this human capacity to access information, energy from beyond time and space. And so I love doing the channeling research. I especially love the trance channeling research because I have, my 50 plus years of experience with that. And that's what really gets me going on a personal level. And so we have a number of channeling studies that we're working on right now. But I want to tell you about two of them that are really exciting to me. And I'll tell you, IONS is already fringe, so, but these two projects are the fringe of the fringe. Not so much today, but you'll see why in a second. So, I do think a lot more people are getting interested in channeling and intuition and ESP and all of these phenomena, way, way more than when I first started at IONS. There's a huge blossoming around it. There's also a huge blossoming around this idea that consciousness is not just on the Earth and on our planet, and that there's actually, sentient beings that live on different planets. And so, through my experience of trance channeling, and I forgot to mention, my mother is also a trance channeler, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of sessions with her. And I personally also learned how to trance channel. And so every once in a while, I would be doing a channeling session with my mom, and a being would come through. And I'll just back up. My personal belief system is that these are, you could call them personalities, separate personalities, because I do believe that our consciousness goes beyond our physical body. You don't have to believe that. And I'm not going to try to dictate that to you. And I think that we can get something out of this research, even if you don't believe that. So I guess I just want to make clear that I'm sharing my personal story here. So I'm giving you my personal take on it. But when I have my scientist hat on, I can't definitively say that the being that's coming through my mom is a separate being. That scientifically, I can't really prove that definitively. Does that make sense? So I have my Helané personal hat on. I have my scientist definitive proof hat on. And those two are a little different in this specific instance. Okay. So channeling experience with my mom. And this being comes through who said it wasn't from Earth. It was from somewhere else. And I was like, whoa, this is really crazy. And when my mom channels, her voice changes, her body shifts. And it was, appeared to me to be a very different body, voice, consciousness. And this happened numerous times. And, the whole UAP extraterrestrial thing got really big. So, and I know that there were so many trance channelers in the public who were saying they were channeling extraterrestrials. And as far as I knew, there had been no formal study looking at that. So I'm now doing 2 formal studies. One study is gathering all the channeled content that we can from trance channelers who believe that the source of the information was an extraterrestrial. So we're collecting all that data, and we're going to analyze it for various themes and for 10 different questions. So we have 10 questions for these extraterrestrials that we're going to try to extract from this content. At the same time, one of my collaborators, his father was a UAP researcher for decades, and he took up the mantle, and he's created a huge database about extraterrestrials and vehicles, etc., from military sources, from kind of like 3D sources. So we're going to ask that data set the same 10 questions. And so what are the similarities and differences between what the trance channelers are saying is the ET say are the answers to those questions, and what the military and other more physical sources are saying? And do those answers compare? So that's one really cool study that I'm really excited about. And the second study, so that type of study is called a cross-sectional study, and it's basically, pulling data that we've already collected and looking at a slice in time about it. The next study is a prospective study. So I asked a bunch of different experts, and I said, hey, if you had an extraterrestrial show up in your living room, what questions would you want to ask them? And so we came up with this structured interview, very anthropologically kind of focused, of what we'd want to ask these extraterrestrials. And so we are having trance channelers, let's say trance channeler A, and we are going to invite them to channel an extraterrestrial being and go through this structured interview. And so let's say that on session 1, the source says that they're Palladians. Okay. So then in session 2, we would invite a different extraterrestrial race. Let's say it's the Orions, and we're going to do that 10 different times, and we're going to ask the same questions with trans channeler A, doing their thing. Then we'll also do that with 9 other trans channelers. So you have trans channeler A, B, C, D, E, F, G channeling the Palladians, answering the same questions. And we can see if those answers are the same across trans channelers for the same races. So I'm really excited about this project. I totally get that it's pretty far out there, but to me, that would be quite remarkable if we found similar answers across them. And then even beyond that, just the content that we might glean. Now, I can't definitively prove if those sources really are extraterrestrial beings, but I think that it's worth the effort and time and resources to see if we can see similarities and differences around those. And those 2 projects, the channeling program is still seeking funding. So if that's something that you or someone else is really jazzed about, then we would definitely appreciate support around that. I see Darlene has her hand up. I'll stop there. Maybe you're all going to leave the call now because it's just too far out there.
No, it's not too far out. So I'm not sure your parents, your grandparents, what they thought was coming through them, the information that was being provided from something, an entity of some sort. And because I've had some people say that God was talking to them, or Jesus, or none of these things are like extraterrestrials, and yet I'm wondering what percentage of your entities that you investigate may or may not be extraterrestrials.
Great question. So, growing up, so my grandfather, I'm a Orthodox Christian. I was raised Orthodox Christian, and my grandfather was just so curious about life and what happens after we die. And even though he kind of got ostracized a little bit from the family and from his community, he started seeking out people who said that they had these type of experiences. And my great uncle was actually a priest in the Orthodox Church, and his specialty was exorcisms. So my grandfather would go with my great uncle to people's homes to support them to, get rid of the spirits. Anyway, I'm giving you a lot more backstory to answer your question. So I'm just giving you the context for this deeply Christian context of my family moving into this experience. So my grandfather would seek out all of these people, and he wrote a book called Life After Death on all his research, and he was so excited to learn about spiritualism in England. And he married my grandmother, and he brought her along to one of these other people's experiences, and all of a sudden she went into a trance. And so he was so excited because, oh, look, my young wife can actually do this. So then his attention shifted. He never could do it, but his attention shifted for my grandmother to do it. And this is my mother's side of the family. Every member of my mother's side has some type of, extraordinary kind of channeling ability. And during those, I don't know how many decades of meetings, I don't know of any extraterrestrial beings that came through. It was often, deceased loved ones, or they believed it was deceased loved ones, or guides, or, sometimes there was a very wise being, the universal consciousness, was the name ascribed to it. Many, many, many. And one of my, there's another book that my uncle automatically wrote called From a Gun to a Flower, that talks about his experience and a lot of the messages that were there, if you're curious about diving into that. And then today, like, let's say I've done 100 channeling sessions with my mom. Out of those, I'd say maybe 5 to 10% had a being that said they were extraterrestrial. But now, obviously, since these two projects are focused on that, then, you know, that shifts. That was a very long-winded answer, but
you're basically going to say to whoever, I thank you for coming, but I really want an extraterrestrial.
Well, this is what's interesting about this phenomenon. And again, this is Helané channeling experience. All the channel, and myself included, all the trance channelers have a very strong working relationship with their guides. And so they are in conversation with them. Hey, we're embarking on this. Here's what they want. The guides are supporting the channeler to, you know, guide who's coming in or not coming in. There's protections in place. So it's not a random process at all. It's very intentional. It's very guided. And we say, hey, this is our intention for who we want to connect with today. And then that becomes manifest.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening.
Thanks, Darlene. Mary.
You're on mute, Mary. You're muted. Oh.
Okay, it's in the lower left if you can't find it.
We can see you talking, but we can't hear you.
Try pressing the space bar and holding it down.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Oh, do it again.
Hold it down.
Oh, I think it's something with her microphone. No, we still can't hear you. I think it's something with your microphone. Sorry
We
about
can't
that.
hear you, Mary. Mary, put your question in the chat.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Janine?
Well, I just had this thought, you know, how we're hearing that we're moving into the age of Aquarius. And that's like a very expansive, creative, leading edge, also connected to extraterrestrial. And so I'm just wondering if, I mean, my guess would be that you're going to get more and more and more support for what you're doing at IONS.
Thank you.
On that. Yeah, hope so.
Too.
Any chance you can hear me now?
Yay!
And I didn't mean to interrupt, Janina. Were you?
I'm done.
Okay, so I did put into chat, and I don't know, Helané, I'll have Helané. I'm going to work on that. But I wonder if our grandparents might have known each other. My father's family was in a car accident when he was about 12, and my late uncle, now Sammy, was 16. Everyone was injured, but Sammy passed away. My grandmother, who I never knew, started seeing a person that led seances by the name of Louis Benjamin in, I think they were in around Springfield, Decatur, Illinois, in that area. She ended up leaving my father and her husband behind and going off with Louis Benjamin as he did these seances. They ended up in Madame John's Legacy in New Orleans, where from the back of a bookstore, they were in the French Quarter, he would do readings. But it was interesting because he's from Canada, and there was a reporter who really thought this was a snake oil person that decided he would follow him around and see what was up and what all the hogwash was about, and really wanted to expose him. But as he went through, because one of the things he would do is he would channel like the poetry of Samuel Coleridge, for instance, and things that the reporter just couldn't quite imagine could happen just from, just kind of Joe on the street who he was. But he wrote this book, and it's probably from the late 20s is what I'm thinking. So I just wanted to let you know about, in case you're doing some research, Birth Through Death, the ethics of the 20th plane, a revelation received through the psychic consciousness of Louis Benjamin.
That's
So,
wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, it's so amazing to me how, we haven't talked about taboos yet. I mean, I feel like the taboos are breaking, but there's such strong taboos on people talking about these things. And yet, I remember when I first started IONS and I started talking about the channel research program, and this was when I gave talks in person, and there'd be lines of people coming up and they'd say, I had this experience, but I can't tell anyone about it, and just over and over and over and over again. I think people are able to talk more about it now, but just like your example, it's like, look at this completely parallel example, so it's remarkable. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was great. And now I'm anxious to hear about the telepathy tapes.
Yes.
When I listened to those, I was just blown away. I just felt like there was this we just come through this huge vortex or something. So I'm anxious to hear about that.
Yes, I agree. I feel really grateful for Kai and her team. So Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, I met her when I first came to IONS, and she was invited to do a talk at IONS for our staff. And she spoke about her work. Should I give a background on the telepathy tapes, or does everyone know? Okay,
I don't think
Diane works with non-speaking children and adults. Sometimes they're called autistic, and they range on that spectrum, but they're non-speaking. And so she's a psychiatrist, and she kept getting notes from parents saying, my child, I can hear their thoughts, or they can hear my thoughts, I think is how it started. They can hear my thoughts, and these kind of strange anecdotes. And so she decided to follow up with it and to try to do some testing on them to see if that was real. Now, Diane's gotten a lot of criticism because that early work wasn't done in a very controlled setting. And she knows that, and she'll be the first to acknowledge that. And the challenge, though, is, these non-speakers are very high needs. And, it's not like you can tell them, oh, just, go into this room and sit by yourself. And, they really need to have very special care. And anyway, that makes this work very, very challenging. So Diane has continued to do this work, paying for it mostly out of her pocket for, over a decade. And somehow she got connected with Kai Dickens, who is a documentary maker. And she was so awed by this story of these non-speakers being able to receive information, but also send information to their parents and caregivers, that she wanted to make a documentary at first, but then ended up turning it into a podcast. So it's audio only, but she has a bunch of the videos up on her website. And they ended up doing kind of informal trials right there on the cameras. And what's so incredible about these experiences is that, you know, if they really turn out to be totally true, their accuracy rate is through the roof. Like I talked about the Gansfeld, you know, we've been doing telepathy experiments for decades, you know, very, very, very long time with really good replicable results. But the effects are really tiny, you know, like they're above chance. Like let's say, you know, there's 10 trials, you might get like, you know, and the chance would be 50% correct. You might get 60% correct, right? Or 65% correct. So it's just like barely above what you would expect by chance, but still very significant, right? So I don't want to dismiss the previous research, but with these non-speakers, it's like they're getting 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 trials correctly, which is unheard of, unbelievable, totally amazing. And so you have two camps, I think, right now. You have the camp that's totally dismissing it, that's like, this is BS. You know, there's all these cues, they're figuring out in other ways, we should just dismiss it. And then, you know, you have people who are just like, this is incredible, we have to do this work. What I'm really excited about is there's so much attention to it now that funding is coming in, and Diane is able to work with collaborators to do more controlled trials. And so she's working with some people at the University of Virginia right now to do just that. So what else do I want to say about that? So the other amazing thing I think about the telepathy tapes is something called the Hill. So it's not just that the non-speaker is hearing their mom's thoughts. It's not that they're seeing deceased loved ones and bringing messages from their deceased loved ones, but they express that they're able to go somewhere called the Hill, which is a location in non-locality. It's not a physical space, but it is a non-local space where many of these non-speakers can go and connect with each other and learn from each other, get support, get guidance, get wisdom. And, you know, it just gets you so emotional thinking about that, because so many of them are not able to communicate with anybody. And so the idea that they have this incredibly rich internal life is just amazing. And that's, I think, one of the major messages of the podcast is that these non-speakers are, you know, they were completely dismissed as ignorant and unaware and low intelligence. And what they're finding is this is completely untrue. And that while their physical bodies, that they have a hard time controlling them, and that they are unable to speak as we are, that they have an incredibly rich internal world and can communicate, but in these non-physical ways. And the other thing that amazes me is, you know, once they are able to communicate, whether it's telepathically or through their tool boards, you know, they talk about how they don't feel like they're in their body, like their consciousness exists like next to their body, or that they can't feel the boundaries of their body. So they're kind of like, even though they have physical bodies, their consciousness is not bounded by it in the same way that mine or yours might be. Anyway, I think it's really incredible. And Kai is now doing a documentary. They're coming to our lab on May 15th, where they will interview our scientists about the evidence. Because, you know, I've seen her and others interviewed, and they say, well, you know, is there any evidence that telepathy is real? And they're like, well, sure. And I'm like, no, it's real. You know, we have all these bodies of evidence showing it. And we got inspired to pool all of the already existing evidence demonstrating telepathy and get it on one website that's an all-in-one place that's totally accessible for the general public, very visually appealing and easy to use, so that we can direct people when they say, oh, but what evidence is there for telepathy? We can say, here you go, come check this out. And we're really excited to meet her and her team and to be able to share the work that we do that's highly relevant to that. You know, the studies I told you about, the bonded pairs, is exactly what this work is. You know, it's but you know, we're using speakers instead of non-speakers. So I'll pause there. See if anyone has questions or comments.
Mary, do you still have your hand up? Did you have another question? Okay. Yeah, I thought that, I just think it's so exciting. It all brought me to tears, really.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions about any of the presentation, Gail?
Oh, I see Gail, yeah.
Yeah, so I can't find the hand on the thing. I just wanted to say that I just watched a 2-hour interview with Joe Rogan, and he's sort of the master pod person, and he was interviewing her. It is absolutely wonderful. And she explains all of the history of how she got into this and what her future is. And she did say that a documentary is the next thing that she's really wanting to work on. And then the other big one is that she has visions of having centers all over the United States where these nonverbal kids could go and communicate with each other, but also where people like us could go and learn about it too. So she's really incredible. So it's worth watching.
Yes.
What is the website that you just referenced where you put all the telepathy information together?
It's not made yet. It's not
Oh,
made.
okay.
Yeah, we're working hard to get that done as quickly as possible because there's such a big need for it. We're collating all the different experiment papers and getting those all organized, and we'd love to have that up in the next few months. Yeah. Darlene?
Since we have a little bit of time, I have another question. So you referred to guides. You have a specific guide that interfaces with you, and your mother has a specific. Are they the same guide? Or are they different? And how do they identify themselves?
So again, this is personal, Helané. I have my own personal guides, and my mother has her own personal guides, and they can communicate with each other. I have a team of guides, and my main guide has given me a name to associate with them. But it's more a feeling that I get, a knowingness. And I think each person, if they choose to, can set the intention to develop a relationship with their guide if they want to, and that relationship might look different for everybody depending on. One thing I didn't talk about is the noetic signature, which is, you know, kind of what I describe as our own unique individual expression of channeling. So, you know, I get goosebumps. That's like my truth meter. You know, I get like downloads of information, you know, but I don't really see colors. You know, someone else might see colors, or they might hear words. Everyone's channeling looks different. So that your relationship with your guide, like I've had people say, but I can't hear them talking to me. It's like, well, you might never, because that might not be how your noetic signature shows up. You might just get a feeling or a knowingness, or, you know, an expansion in your body or contraction. It can show up in so many different ways. And so when we invite our mind to let go of what it's supposed to look like and step into a place of openness and curiosity, and setting intentions around what you'd like to see happen, then that relationship can really unfold in a beautiful way. Yes, Darlene.
So, you, at the beginning, someone else said they'd taken your class on channeling. You actually offer a class and teach people how to do that?
So there's 2 courses that I taught with the Shift Network. One is called The Art and Science of Channeling, and it's being rebooted right now, so it's live. I think you could probably still enroll if you want to. That course was focused on the evidence and the science. So it gives a lecture talking about the different questions of the channeling research program, and goes through the science of it, and it also includes a guided practice. So that course that's being taught now isn't specifically focused on teaching channeling. There was another class through Shift called the Best Practices of Channeling, and that was specifically teaching people how to channel. And I've asked them to reboot it, and they said they don't want to. So I'm looking into doing that at IONS. But it's funny because I have live Q&As right now for that reboot science class. No one's asking me anything about the evidence lectures. All they want to know is, how do I channel? And here's what happened to me. And how do I deal with that? And please, like, it's all about personal practice, which I find really, I think people are just so excited about that right now, about nurturing their own kind of channeling path and how to tap. I mean, anyway, the world's a mess, right? I mean, we need all the help we can get to be able to discern and stay grounded and really stay in our hearts. Anyway.
So you can, you have a book.
Yes.
Could you put that in the chat, please? Or have somebody?
The book talks about it too in the last chapters, about how to.
I'll put it, when I send out the video, I'll put it in there.
Thank you, thank you.
I put it on the chat.
Oh,
It's on Amazon.
thank you. We have a few more questions.
Yeah, Mary, do you have your hand up again?
This time I do.
Okay.
Thank you. But so Helané, I wonder just what philosophically, spiritually, even religiously, how do you feel about your guide? Do you feel that everyone has one? Is this like a guardian angel? Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Again, this is personal Helané, not scientist Helané. Because I hold the worldview that consciousness can exist outside of the physical body, I believe that there are non-physical beings that exist and that we can set intentions to connect with them. Numerous traditions talk about having guides, helpers, ancestors, guardian angels, whatever you want to call them, these non-physical beings that are invested in supporting us to thrive on our path on this planet. And so I don't get too caught up with the nomenclature, but I do believe that relationship can and does exist. And if you have an intention to develop that you can.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Janine?
So I kind of have 2 questions that go together. And one of them is about, so you were talking about channeling, and I had someone tell me, wow, you have a really amazing channel, and would you like to take my class to improve that and all of that? And I just kept feeling like, no, that's just how I am. As an example, I can't remember the word, which is really funny, but my mom had this certain heart condition that she was going to need to have a test for, but they said, hey, you got to wait you wait in line, it's 6 months from now. And she told me about it, and I just said, Mom, are you getting enough magnesium? Now, I hadn't studied that at all, but I went ahead and looked, heart, magnesium, and sure enough, it was a factor. Anyway, she talked with her doctor and increased her magnesium, and by the time it was her turn, they're like, "Oh, you don't have any symptoms, nothing's going on, you're fine." And so I guess that might be what one would consider some kind of channeling, but I don't really know. And
Yeah, like I said, it shows up in so many different ways. And so, you know, could there be any way for you to know that through conventional means? Probably not. And so maybe that was an intuitive hit. Now, I really try to support people to move away from this thinking of better than and worse than, like, oh, that person who said to you, oh, you're a great channel, you should improve that. I mean, if that that whole superior inferior thing, I really try to move away from that and say we actually all have this capacity, and how do we nurture it so it can support us in our daily lives. So let's say, Janine, you're like, that was really incredible, and that helped me and helped my mom. I want to listen more carefully. I want to do things that support me so that information can come to me more easily when I want it to. And then that's what this channeling path is all about, is having that interest and that curiosity and wanting to nourish and nurture it, but that everyone, I think, can do it. And if you aren't feeling called to take a class with that person, then don't. And someone else will show up and you're like, wow, that's who I want to mentor with right now, and trust that the right opportunities will show up for you and that you'll know when to take them or not. So we have 2 more hands and we just have 5 minutes left. So
okay.
I'm going to have us move on. Paula.
Yeah, thank you. Before I ask my questions, the thing just keeps coming back to me. What a setup it was, your life, and so great. For such a time as this, that whole beginning of your life with the paranormal, and then the fact that you were able to develop such a high level of scientific prowess to join those together for the times that we need it right now. It's just really, I just thought that was such a setup. It's great.
Yes.
And I
Not
think that we have,
accidental at all. Yes.
I think we have an intention when we come in, and I just want to say, well done. Thank you for doing that, because I couldn't grudge them. But my question, back to the channeling, you mentioned your background, your Christian background, which I share with you more on a esoteric level. And the channeling, you said, is with protection. This was something that was very important to me in my personal evolution, being able to enter these realms with protection. And I would really like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yes, it is a key component of what I call the best practices of channeling is protection. So it's one of the key components, and I talk a lot about that in my class, and then I think I talk about it. I have a section on it in the book as well. Yep. I don't have time to dive into it more deeply, but yes, I'm aligned.
Okay.
I'll just say this one thing. Some people say, well, if we're all interconnected and we're all one, then who do we need to protect ourselves from? And yet we live in physical bodies, and we have nervous systems, and they can get affected by different energetics. And so I do think it is a good best practice to have some type of energetic and other protection intention setting.
Thank you.
And I thought there was one more hand, but it went away.
So I think we're finished with the questions. Do you have one last wrap up that you would like to say? This has been a great program.
Thank you. Just, deep gratitude to all of you for your courage in being curious and being open, being willing. And I hope you will be inspired and motivated and excited by our conversation tonight, and that it will fill you up to keep going, because the world needs all of us right now so desperately. And so thank you for all that you do.
Well, and thank you for your courage to take your personal parapsychology knowledge and curiosity and interest into the scientific community, where it was certainly not welcome, for probably still not welcome.
Right.
Yeah. And are you finding that the scientific community is opening up, or not so much yet?
I am actually quite a bit. And, I talk a lot about, again, I like spectrums. So you have the diehard believers, there are cheerleaders. You have the diehard skeptics who, no matter what I tell them, they're never going to buy in. I don't like wasting my time on that. It's really the people who are open and curious and willing to hear. We have people all the time emailing us now like, wow, I want to get into this research. How do I do that? I can't really tell people in my department, but maybe I could do something on the side. Yeah, big shifts happening. I keep predicting, I feel like within 5 years, like 5 years from now, I feel like it's going to look very different. Very different. Yeah.
That's very exciting. So I'm going to put my screen back on gallery view, and everyone can say goodbye to Helané. How do you say your name?
Helané.
Helané.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much, everybody.
Thank you,
Karen,
guys.
Thank you.
Karen put in the chat how you can join IONS and have access to some of their research and things. Tell us, give us a really quick rundown of what the advantage of being a member in IONS is.
Well, they used to fund the explorers, Lewis and Clark and Admiral Byrd. We are at IONS. The scientists are creating these opportunities for us to fund their exploration. And it's a different kind of exploration, but it's a really important exploration. So I hope that you all will find your explorer self and invest in our operation. And I hope that each of you feels the kind of energy that we feel every day working for IONS, and the connectedness was just wonderful tonight. I mean, I so enjoyed being with each of you. And so if you have any questions or you want to join this team and this community and get closer to finding our place in the world and helping the world get better, then I put my information in the chat, but Dottie can always find us. So thanks to each of you.
Yes, and we also have members only events where only members are invited, and we have conversations like this, and there's special perks. Yes.
So thank you again, Helané. That was just a wonderful program, and thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Wonderful meeting.
Bye.